What did happen to me? I got old and I very on purpose disappeared from public life. I made wonderful friendships. I had the greatest dog ever. I built a couple homes. I saw a good part of the world.
Steve Burns became the beloved host of Blue's Clues, teaching millions of children critical thinking skills through his green-striped shirt and animated dog companion. But in 2002, he vanished from television screens across America, sparking decades of wild rumors about drug overdoses, mental breakdowns, and tragic accidents. The internet exploded with conspiracy theories about what really happened to Steve. Now, at 50 years old, he's finally revealed the shocking truth behind his mysterious disappearance. And it's nothing like what anyone expected. Stephen Michael Burns was born on October 9, 1973 in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, to Janet and Joseph Burns. His father worked as a human resources director, while his mother was a teacher. From an early age, Steve showed a natural inclination toward performance, participating in school plays and local theater productions throughout his childhood. He wasn't necessarily the most outgoing kid, but he had a unique ability to connect with younger children. After graduating from Boyertown Area Senior High School in 1991, Steve enrolled at DeSales University in Center Valley, Pennsylvania, where he studied theater. His college years were formative, not just academically, but personally. He began to understand his own creative process and developed the patient, methodical approach that would later make him perfect for children's television. His professors noted his unusual combination of intelligence and childlike wonder. In the mid-1990s, Steve moved to New York City to pursue his dream of becoming a serious actor. Like thousands of other young hopefuls, he waited tables, auditioned for off-Broadway productions, and took whatever small roles he could find. His goal was to eventually work on Broadway or in independent films. He had no interest in children's television. In fact, he barely watched TV at all. The audition that would change his life came almost by accident. In 1995, Nickelodeon was developing a new educational show called Blue's Clues, created by Tracy Page Johnson, Todd Kessler, and Angela Santamero. The show needed a host who could talk directly to children through the camera, making them feel like active participants rather than passive viewers. The creators held hundreds of auditions, looking for someone with a specific combination of traits. Steve's audition was unconventional. While other actors tried to be energetic and overly enthusiastic, Steve was calm, thoughtful, and genuinely curious. He treated the imaginary children watching as equals, not talking down to them or being condescending. The producers were intrigued by his natural ability to pause and wait for responses, creating space for real interaction, even though the children were at home. Blue's Clues premiered on September 8, 1996, and immediately stood out from other children's programming. The show's revolutionary format featured Steve as the human host living in a house with his animated dog, Blue, who would leave paw print clues to help solve daily mysteries. What made the show special wasn't just the interactive format. It was Steve's genuine respect for his young audience's intelligence. The production process was unlike anything Steve had experienced. Each episode took weeks to film, with Steve performing alone in front of green screens and animated backgrounds that would be added later. He had to imagine Blue's reactions, pause for responses from home viewers, and maintain energy levels that would engage children without being overwhelming. The technical demands were exhausting, but Steve found the work deeply rewarding. Within months, Blue's Clues became Nickelodeon's highest-rated show. Steve's green-striped shirt became iconic, and his catchphrases like, "We just figured out Blue's Clues," entered the cultural lexicon. Parents appreciated that the show actually taught problem-solving skills, while children formed genuine emotional connections with Steve. He received thousands of letters from young fans who considered him a personal friend. The show's success was unprecedented in children's television. By 1998, Blue's Clues merchandise was generating millions of dollars in revenue. Steve's image appeared on everything from lunchboxes to pajamas. He was invited to appear on talk shows, participate in charity events, and even perform at the White House. For someone who had wanted to be a serious actor, the level of fame was overwhelming. But with success came unexpected pressures. Steve began to realize that his identity was becoming inseparable from the character he played on television. Children would approach him in public, expecting him to be exactly like his TV persona. The line between Steve Burns the person and Steve the Blues Clues host was beginning to blur in ways that made him uncomfortable. By 2000, Steve Burns had become one of the most recognizable faces in America. Blues Clues was airing in over 120 countries, and Steve was receiving fan mail from around the world. The show had won numerous awards, including several Daytime Emmy nominations. But behind the scenes, the pressures of fame were taking their toll on the young performer. The demands of the show were relentless. Steve worked 6 days a week, often for 12 hours a day. The physical requirements of performing alone in front of green screens, maintaining high energy levels, and repeating the same actions multiple times for different camera angles were exhausting. He had no time for personal relationships, hobbies, or the normal activities that people in their 20s typically enjoy. More challenging than the physical demands was the emotional weight of being a role model to millions of children. Steve took this responsibility seriously, perhaps too seriously. He worried constantly about setting a good example and feared that any personal mistake might disappoint his young fans. The pressure to be perfect was suffocating his creativity and personal growth. Steve's social life became increasingly complicated. He couldn't go to bars, restaurants, or public events without being mobbed by children and their parents. Dating was nearly impossible. Potential partners were either intimidated by his fame or interested in him for the wrong reasons. He began to feel isolated and trapped by his own success. The financial rewards were substantial, but Steve had never been motivated primarily by money. He was earning more than most actors could dream of, but he felt creatively stifled. The show's format, while successful, didn't allow for much artistic growth or experimentation. He began to question whether he was wasting his talent and his 20s on a career that, while meaningful, wasn't fulfilling his artistic ambitions. By 2001, Steve was experiencing what he would later describe as an existential crisis. He was successful, wealthy, and beloved by millions, but he felt empty inside. The question that haunted him was whether he was living his own life or simply playing a character that had consumed his identity. While Steve Burns was struggling with the emotional and psychological pressures of fame, he was also dealing with a more practical problem that would ultimately force his hand. At just 28 years old, Steve was losing his hair. The genetic predisposition to male pattern baldness, inherited from his father's side of the family, was becoming impossible to ignore. The hair loss might not have been a career-ending problem for most actors, but Steve's situation was unique. His character on Blue's Clues was specifically designed to appeal to young children, and his youthful appearance was crucial to that appeal. The green-striped shirt, khaki pants, and full head of hair created a specific visual identity that had become integral to the show's brand. Steve began using various treatments to slow the hair loss, but nothing was working effectively. Makeup artists were spending increasing amounts of time trying to conceal the thinning areas, and even strategic camera angles couldn't hide the problem indefinitely. The production team was growing concerned about how to maintain the character's appearance as Steve's hairline continued to recede. The irony wasn't lost on Steve. Here he was, at the height of his career, being defeated by something as mundane as genetics. He had survived the pressures of fame, the demands of the schedule, and the weight of being a role model. But he couldn't overcome basic biology. The situation felt almost absurd, and Steve began to see it as a sign that it was time to move on. The hair loss became a symbol of a larger issue, the impossibility of maintaining the Peter Pan-like character indefinitely. Steve was approaching 30, and while he could still connect with children, he was beginning to feel ridiculous, pretending to be a young, carefree character when he was dealing with very adult concerns like career burnout and personal identity. The final straw came during a particularly difficult day of filming in early 2002. Steve looked in the mirror and realized that he was using more hair products and makeup than some Hollywood actresses. The absurdity of the situation crystallized his decision to leave the show. What Steve Burns didn't reveal to anyone at the time was that his decision to leave Blue's Clues wasn't just about hair loss or career burnout. Behind his cheerful public persona, he was struggling with severe clinical depression that had been building for years. The condition, which he would only discuss openly decades later, was the real driving force behind his departure from the show. The depression had started gradually, sometime around 2000, as the pressures of fame began to overwhelm him. Initially, Steve attributed his feelings to normal stress and exhaustion, but as months passed, the symptoms became more severe and persistent. He was experiencing classic signs of depression, persistent sadness, loss of interest in activities he once enjoyed, difficulty sleeping, and a general sense of hopelessness. The irony of his situation was crushing. Steve spent his days teaching children about problem-solving, optimism, and curiosity, while privately battling thoughts of despair and meaninglessness. He was surrounded by people who depended on him to be upbeat and energetic, but he was running on empty. The cognitive dissonance between his public persona and private reality was becoming unbearable. Steve's depression was complicated by the unique circumstances of his fame. Unlike typical depression sufferers, he couldn't simply take time off or reduce his responsibilities. Millions of children were counting on him, and the show's production schedule was relentless. He felt trapped in a situation where seeking help might jeopardize not just his career, but the livelihoods of hundreds of people who worked on the show. The stigma surrounding mental health in the entertainment industry made his situation even more difficult. In 2002, there was little public discussion about depression among celebrities, and Steve feared that revealing his struggles might damage his reputation as a children's entertainer. Parents trusted him with their children's entertainment and education. Would they continue to do so if they knew he was battling mental illness? Steve began to realize that leaving the show wasn't just a career decision, it was a matter of survival. He needed to step away from the public eye, deal with his mental health issues, and rediscover who he was outside of his television persona. The hair loss provided a convenient excuse, but the real reason was much more serious and personal. In April 2002, Steve Burns filmed his final episode of Blue's Clues. The farewell was handled with characteristic thoughtfulness. Steve explained to his young viewers that he was going to college and introduced his brother Joe, played by Donovan Patton, as the new host. The transition was designed to be gentle and reassuring for children who had formed strong emotional attachments to Steve. But the explanation provided to the public was deliberately vague. Nickelodeon and Steve's representatives simply said he was leaving to pursue other opportunities. They didn't mention the hair loss, the depression, or the career burnout. This lack of specific information created a vacuum that the internet was all too happy to fill with wild speculation and conspiracy theories. Almost immediately, rumors began circulating about Steve's real reasons for leaving. Some claimed he had died in a car accident, while others insisted he had overdosed on drugs. The most persistent rumor was that he had suffered a mental breakdown and was institutionalized. Chat rooms and early social media platforms were filled with elaborate theories about what had really happened to Steve. The drug overdose rumor was particularly persistent and damaging. Despite having no basis in reality, it spread rapidly across the internet and even made its way into mainstream media discussions. Some versions of the story claimed Steve had been using heroin, while others suggested he had died from a cocaine overdose. The rumors were so widespread that many people accepted them as fact. Steve was aware of these rumors, but chose not to address them directly. He was focused on his mental health recovery and didn't want to dignify the speculation with responses. However, the persistent nature of the rumors was hurtful, especially since they painted him as someone who had betrayed the trust of children and parents. The irony was that he had left the show precisely because he took that trust so seriously. The urban legend surrounding Steve's departure became part of internet folklore. For years, people would confidently repeat false information about his death or drug use, often claiming they had heard it from reliable sources. The power of these rumors demonstrated how invested the public had become in Steve's character, and how difficult it was for them to accept that he might have simply chosen to leave. After leaving Blue's Clues, Steve Burns deliberately stepped away from the public eye to focus on his mental health and personal growth. He sought professional help for his depression and began the slow process of rediscovering his identity outside of his television persona. The transition was more difficult than he had anticipated. After 6 years of being Steve from Blue's Clues, he had to learn how to be just Steve again. The first few years after leaving the show were marked by experimentation and self-discovery. Steve tried various creative projects, including music, writing, and independent film work. He formed a band called Steve Burns and the Struggle, which allowed him to express his more adult artistic sensibilities. The music was introspective and sometimes dark, a stark contrast to his wholesome television image. Steve also began to reconnect with his original passion for acting. He took small roles in independent films and theater productions, grateful for the opportunity to play complex, flawed characters. These projects didn't pay nearly as much as Blue's Clues had, but they provided the artistic fulfillment he had been craving. He was rediscovering his love for performance without the pressures of being a role model. The financial freedom that Blue's Clues had provided allowed Steve to be selective about his projects. He could afford to take risks and pursue passion projects without worrying about commercial success. This freedom was both liberating and overwhelming. After years of having every decision made for him, Steve had to learn how to navigate his own career choices. During this period, Steve also worked on his personal relationships. He had missed out on many typical young adult experiences while hosting Blue's Clues, and he was determined to make up for lost time. He traveled, dated, and formed friendships with people who knew him as Steve the person rather than Steve the television host. The depression that had driven him to leave the show continued to be a challenge, but Steve was learning to manage it with therapy and, when necessary, medication. He became an advocate for mental health awareness, though he wasn't yet ready to discuss his own struggles publicly. By 2006, Steve Burns had largely recovered from his depression and was ready to re-engage with the entertainment industry on his own terms. He began taking more visible roles, including voice work in animated series and guest appearances on television shows. However, he was careful to choose projects that aligned with his values and artistic goals, rather than simply pursuing fame or money. Steve's first major public appearance after leaving Blue's Clues was on The Rosie O'Donnell Show in 2006. The interview was carefully orchestrated to address some of the rumors that had circulated about his departure while maintaining his privacy about the more personal aspects of his decision. He appeared healthy and happy, which helped dispel some of the more dramatic conspiracy theories. In subsequent interviews, Steve began to open up gradually about his reasons for leaving Blue's Clues. He initially focused on the more acceptable reasons: career burnout, desire for artistic growth, and the natural evolution of his interests. The hair loss explanation, while true, was presented as a minor factor rather than a major consideration. It wasn't until 2016, during an interview with the Huffington Post, that Steve first publicly discussed his struggle with depression. He revealed that mental health issues had been a significant factor in his decision to leave the show. He still didn't provide extensive details. The revelation was groundbreaking because it was one of the first times a major children's television personality had openly discussed mental health struggles. Steve's honesty about his depression was both brave and important. It helped normalize conversations about mental health and showed that even people who seem to have perfect lives can struggle with these issues. For many fans who had grown up watching him, his openness about depression was as educational as anything he had taught them on Blue's Clues. The revelation also helped explain why Steve had been so reluctant to discuss his departure from the show. Depression carries significant stigma, especially for public figures who work with children. By waiting until he was in a better place mentally, Steve was able to discuss his struggles in a way that was helpful rather than concerning. In 2021, nearly 20 years after leaving Blue's Clues, Steve Burns finally decided to address the rumors and speculation directly. The occasion was the show's 25th anniversary, and Nickelodeon had invited him to create a special message for the generation that had grown up watching him. What resulted was a video that became one of the most emotionally powerful pieces of content in recent internet history. The video, posted on Nick Jr.'s Twitter account, featured Steve wearing his iconic green striped shirt and speaking directly to the camera as if no time had passed. He acknowledged that his viewers had grown up, gone to college, gotten jobs, and started families. Then he addressed the elephant in the room. "I realized that was kind of abrupt. I just kind of got up and went to college. And that was really challenging, by the way, but great because I got to use my mind and take a step at a time. And now I literally am doing many of the things that I wanted to do." The video was Steve's way of providing closure to the millions of people who had felt abandoned by his sudden departure. He explained that leaving the show had been necessary for his personal growth and mental health, though he didn't go into specific details about his depression. The message was both an apology and an explanation, delivered with the same gentle sincerity that had made him beloved as a children's host. But it was in subsequent interviews following the video's viral success that Steve finally revealed the complete truth about his departure. He discussed the hair loss issue more openly, explaining how the practical realities of maintaining his youthful appearance had become untenable. He also spoke more candidly about his depression, describing how the pressures of fame and the weight of being a role model had contributed to his mental health struggles. The revelation that Steve had left Blue's Clues because he was going bald was initially met with some skepticism and humor. Many people found it hard to believe that such a successful career had been derailed by something as common as hair loss. But Steve's explanation made sense when considered alongside the show's specific requirements and his own perfectionist tendencies. Steve Burns' decision to finally reveal the truth about his departure from Blue's Clues had a profound impact on both his personal life and popular culture. The combination of practical concerns, hair loss, and serious mental health issues, depression, created a complex narrative that was both relatable and important. His honesty helped dispel decades of harmful rumors while providing valuable lessons about fame, mental health, and personal growth. The hair loss revelation, while initially surprising, resonated with many men who had experienced similar concerns about their appearance and career prospects. Steve's willingness to admit that something as mundane as genetics had influenced a major career decision was refreshingly honest in an industry known for carefully crafted public images. More importantly, Steve's openness about his depression helped continue important conversations about mental health in the entertainment industry. His story demonstrated that mental health struggles can affect anyone, regardless of their success or public persona. For many fans who had grown up watching Blue's Clues, learning about Steve's depression was a valuable lesson in empathy and understanding. The viral success of Steve's 2021 video also proved that his connection with his audience had never truly been broken. The millions of people who shared and commented on the video showed that they had never stopped caring about him, even after 20 years. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers expressing gratitude for the closure and understanding his message provided. Steve's story has become a case study in how child stars can successfully transition to adult life, despite the unique challenges they face. His decision to prioritize his mental health over his career, while difficult at the time, ultimately allowed him to return to the entertainment industry on his own terms. Today, Steve Burns continues to work in entertainment, taking on projects that interest him without the pressure of maintaining a perfect public image. He has become an advocate for mental health awareness and continues to connect with fans who appreciate his honesty and vulnerability. His legacy extends beyond Blue's Clues to include important conversations about fame, mental health, and the courage required to make difficult personal decisions. The man who taught a generation of children to look for clues was hiding the biggest mystery of all, the simple truth that he was human, struggling with the same challenges that affect millions of people. Steve Burns' story reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths are also the most ordinary ones. Thanks for watching. Click here to check another video, and make sure to subscribe to our channel.